I'm Toya Dubin, Project Director for the Mapping Early New York project at the New Amsterdam History Center, and I am very grateful to be here with you today. A giant thank you to the patient and far-sighted sponsors who've made all of this possible, in particular the Daughters of Holland Dames, who believed in us when this seemed like a crazy overreach, something that scholars just simply shouldn't be up to. Here are links to our project if you need to reach me, info@newamsterdamhistorycenter.org. And in case you think I do this on my own, let me disabuse you of that notion immediately. There is a really big team involved here. And you'll see here Nitin Gadia, our mapping specialist, Edward van Dijk from the Netherlands, our 3D modeler, Drew Schiptar-Revis, the Algonquian historical consultant, Esme Berg, our executive director, who makes it all happen, Mustafa, who has created a bunch of really wonderful features in the encyclopedia that you'll see, Jerry O'Toole, who brings in all the wonderful document collections we're so privileged to host, and Cindy Bogart, who makes it all look beautiful. We've also been so lucky to work with Dame Firth Fabend and Charles Gearing, Len Tantillo, and most recently with Russell Shorto. This year of working with him and the New York Historical Society and Charlie Gearing at the New Netherlands Research Center to develop the 3D model was a tremendous privilege for us. And I hope some of you get a chance to see the touch screen on the museum floor there. It's really fun. When we found out that we'd have the honor to do this, I literally wanted to run out and hug every single dame. I sent out an email to Suzanne. I hope she forwarded it to you guys, because I just was like, oh, I'm so grateful to everyone. But the path to this has been anything but smooth. So let's have a bit of history, because Suzanne asked me to give you a history of how this all came about. And then I'll share some details in the making of things. In 2008-2009, what was originally called the VNAP, the Virtual New Amsterdam Project, included a 3D model, a list of houses, and their occupants. We worked with Courtney Haff and Len Tantillo, the wonderful historic painter, and this was how the project got me hooked. In this early first version, we really hadn't attempted to populate the model a whole lot. Our encyclopedia, then called a database, included property types, an index of names and occupations, and many articles, maps, and documents provided by our partner organizations. We worked with David Voorhees, and we attempted to add some more names and biographies to the lists of the houses. The Castello plan was included, but it was really just a link, because the mapping hadn't been developed yet. By 2011, here are pictures of the model, how it looked. And we started adding more document collections and more subjects in the encyclopedia. You'll see that the characters here are taken from 17th century Dutch paintings, and that we had not yet addressed the enslaved African or indigenous populations at that time. Dame Firth Fabend worked with a team of scholars, including Jaap Jacobs, as we carefully populated the model created by Len Tantillo. Here you can see that Stone Street was modeled in some detail, but the majority of the model was what was called gray box, or in this case, brown box mode. And this was Petra Stuyvesant's house at the time. So let's take a quick look. This is a sneak peek. You can see that house over here, just on the water, and this is the new model. And as you can see, we were leaning more into a bit of realism. So in the years from 2010 to 2021, we devoted our energies to including many more document collections in the encyclopedia and developing the mapping portion of the project. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an orientation here. If I can find my mouse somewhere up on that screen. Alrighty. This is our main page, and you can enter the mapping project here, or if you prefer here, and right here is where you can see the work we've been doing at New York Historical Society, should you wish to. And this is what the encyclopedia looks like. And if you've registered and have an account, you can go to your account here and see your folders. Okay, I'm gonna step back here. And we're gonna go to the mapping project. A note about language. In my work, I spend a lot of time reading 17th century documents that use words like Indians rather than Native Americans or indigenous people, and slaves rather than enslaved persons. Please forgive me if I use vocabulary that comes from the documents. We've used multiple terms to cover this question in the encyclopedia. So when we go to the encyclopedia, you'll be able to see that in things like affiliations, I have used Native American, Indian, indigenous people. I'm trying to make sure that people who use different vocabulary get good search results when they're using our tool, because I know that not everyone uses the same vocabulary. So we developed this slider so that you could slide back and forth between two maps. And you can see here, we're gonna put in the original Castello plan, which hopefully you've seen at New York Historical, and you can see how you can slide back and forth there. And then we also developed a time slider, which allowed you to use some of the layers and see how they become active at particular times. So you can see, we did things like adding the tax lots, and you can click into a tax lot, and that should allow you to go directly to the encyclopedia and read our entry on that tax lot and link out to the people who were there, various subjects. We also, as we started working on the documents, began to create ways for you to use drop-downs, which allow you to choose which record series you're interested in looking at. Once you find the record series that you're interested in looking at, you can do things like sorting by title, by date, by document ID. You can search within the title of a document. You can limit your searches by dates. This hopefully helps to make a good research tool. So documents, collections, and finding aids were added thanks to the wonderful collaborations with the New York State Archives, the New York State Library, the New York City Municipal Archives, the Holland Society, and a growing list of other organizations, most recently the New York Botanical Garden. This is a tour of the model as it existed in about 2011. And we're gonna run that tour while I tell you the story, the next piece of the story. So in 2014, Nitin Gadia and I traveled to Albany to give a presentation to the New York State Archives demonstrating the potential for linking GIS information to maps, 3D models, and the Dutch documents collection. This meeting included members of the New York State Archives, New York State Library, and the New Netherlands Institute. This group was really enthusiastic about our concepts surrounding search and research. Some, however, were concerned that we had not defined the specific audience for this project. Is it for kids? Is it for scholars? Is it for genealogists? For reenactors? Yes, we replied. All that and more. Others were concerned that there wasn't a clear completion goal. Yes, we replied. It will never be done. Just as Wikipedia will never be done, we can only hope we can make good progress in each iteration. Months after that meeting, we received a really nice call from the Daughters of Holland Dames in 2015. So we presented our work and were thrilled to find that the audience was enthusiastic and completely undaunted by the concept of a project that would require multiple iterations. Clearly, someone had told them that a woman's work is never done. So, thanks to the resulting funding from the Daughters of Holland Dames, we began adding more maps, more document collections, and more finding aids to the project. So I'm going to stop this. we're going to go back to the map for just a minute. The Mannahatta map of 1609 was added as a result of this wonderful funding, including a whole list of additional maps. And the Mannahatta map is particularly interesting because it takes up a great deal of space and shows all of the streams, the Lenape trails, and the great, beautiful forested area. So, research capabilities were improved through the use of layers in the maps, which you've seen here, and we can turn those on and off as you need to. And you can use this Zoom to button to go to any particular map that you wish. Jerry O'Toole began improving the encyclopedia at this time, and we're going to go to the documents. And he began to include lots more fields for places, ships named, people, document types, so that we could do all kinds of interesting things. This is deed, so we won't see it there. I'm sorry. And that would allow us to, so you can see this document is a resolution. It could be a manifest, it could be a manumission document, it could be an Indian deed. We have all kinds of different document types that we've included here. And we also include, in many cases, modern locations, the to and from parties if it's a transaction, related ancestors if there are other people who are mentioned in the document or for whom this document is important. We also began adding mobile-friendly features, and what became evident as we proceeded is that the more research features we added, the more we could determine how to enhance the mapping and the encyclopedia and the 3D model. So the research on manumissions, for examples, and Indian deeds in particular, and manumission documents, became a great source for the names and stories of the indigenous people and the enslaved people. This is a wonderful Indian deed. It has this amazing drawing in it, which personally I believe is probably done by an indigenous person as he leaned over the table. And this is probably an indigenous person smoking a peace pipe. But it could be a Dutchman, we don't know. However, that welcome belt sort of is the giveaway for me. In any case, this one document allowed us to begin biographies on a great number of indigenous people. Some who were very important and had biographies out there in the world, like Chief Oratom. And when we started getting very careful about that with the documents, we could create a timeline of Chief Oratom's life and see that documents relating to him began in 1643, and so far we've got things that continue through 1664, so 20 years of a diplomatic career for this man. It really made a big difference in the way we started to view how we would present the 3D model. We also began adding functionality into the encyclopedia that would allow us to show family relationships. For example, here is Anna Pell, and I found it particularly appropriate that it was the Daughters of Holland Dames that helped us fund the family relationships. It kind of made sense, right? You can see that her father was the Sagamore chief on page the 2nd, and if we go to his entry, and there's his signature, we can find even his father. So in some cases, we have several generations of information. We are very far from complete on that, of course, and would very much like to get some additional work happening with it. The manumission documents also were very, very interesting for us. And they allowed us also to begin biographies on the enslaved and conditionally freed Africans in the settlement. And you can go and see, here's Manuel the Spaniard, and you can see we have him listed as slave, enslaved person, half free, half citizen, freed status. You know, we're sort of working on the vocabulary of what that will be as it evolves, for sure. But you can see his manumission papers, if you wish to, directly from his biography. And if you run the timeline on him, very interestingly, not only do you find his manumission papers, but you also find confirmation of the land patent that he was given, which is pretty interesting. And if you wish to, you can find out about that land patent. We'll take you back to the Costello plan, and we'll put these original grants on. And if I zoom out here a little bit, this area up here, you can see was called the land of the blacks. It's the area where people were given land but were charged a freedom tax in order to maintain their conditional freedom. So they began farming these areas, and a certain amount of their produce or their livestock had to go back to the Dutch West India Company annually in order for them to maintain their freedom. In 2021, we began working with Edward van Dyck from the Netherlands. And the model went through yet another iteration. This iteration, you'll see, runs a little bit slowly online. You have to kind of wait for it to load. We're working on that question. In the new model, things are very different. But I don't know if I can get to this. There we go. It allows you to zoom around through the model, and in each of these stories, you can click into the encyclopedia and learn something directly from the 3D model. So this was the beginning of our goal to start integrating the 3D model and the encyclopedia, because ultimately it's fine to be able to walk around in a 3D model, but if you can't learn anything about what's going on in there, then it gets kind of boring. Then, a major grant from the Gardner Foundation allowed us to devote our time to improving pretty much anything. And so we've spent the last couple of years seriously improving the maps. We've added Long Island to the maps. I'm going to turn off some of this so that we can do some interesting things with the Long Island maps. We can start with this map, and you can zoom directly to the maps. You can go back and forth, of course. And you can turn on, for example, here are all the European settlements. Here are the paths in the Brooklyn area, the Lenape paths. Here are the tribes. I can also add in all these little dots that you see are things like cemeteries and interesting points of interest. And those all respond to the timeline. So you can watch the island develop. We are also creating a 3D model that will be unveiled in May on Long Island, which includes an indigenous village and a shipwreck. The grant has also allowed us to create the My Folders functionality so that users can save their research and email it to one another, and that paved the way for us to use this in schools. We are thrilled to let you know that a New York City private school that is we're testing this feature, and it is a school that has very likely educated dames in the past 100 years. So we're grateful for that opportunity. In the meantime, we encourage all the dames to register on our site and enjoy saving some of their research. So here is the main screen where you should be able to, this is the main screen for the kiosk at the New York Historical. In 23 and 24, our team worked with Edward Van Dyke, Andrew Shipdar-Ravis, Russell Shorto and the team at New York Historical, and Charlie Gearing joined the team. So for almost a year, we worked with all of them to create this latest iteration that has 10 stops on a tour. We're going to start with the House of the Enslaved Workers. I don't know why it's going to say that, I'm so sorry. In any case, you can see that we zoom into this tiny little house. And this is where we used a great deal of AI in order to create the characters to populate the model. We started looking at 17th century paintings of Africans, and they were all either in fancy dress or mostly nude. Neither one of those things seemed appropriate for working in New Netherland in the Little Ice Age. And we actually did a lot of research on what would be likely to work for enslaved Africans there. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here. And we found a swatch book of fabric. And that fabric, we did a bunch of research on, and we're not the only people researching the fabrics that were used for the slave trade. There are others who are doing so. And you can see links to articles by other people who are working on this question. And we also were able to link this particular type of cloth to the original documents in the holds of ships. So we fed that into an AI, and I'm going to give you a still image instead of the video here. And you'll see the lady who is wearing a skirt at the front of the house here. She is wearing a skirt that's made of the fabric from the swatch that we researched. And we determined the appropriate cut of skirt. She's also wearing, her top is made of unbleached duffel cloth, which was also in the hold of many of those ships and was used to keep people warm. And the other folks here are also wearing cloth that is appropriate, either indigo dyed or not. We also paid a lot of attention to the work of Joel Grossman and his work on the seeds in Lower Manhattan. All of the gardens are planted only with seeds that he saw in the 17th century layer. Okay, we're going to move on to the church. If you get a chance to go to the exhibit, you will see that there are some really beautiful church windows in the exhibit. We actually used those exact windows in the construction of the church in this 3D model. And when you look at the church, and you'll see it in just a moment as we go in, the really beautiful stonework on the sides of the church is taken from images of other Dutch churches, and we researched this using, of course, our own tools, and found the contract of John and Richard Ogden of Stamford, Connecticut, to build that stone church here. So the ability to use the document collection to help enhance the model made things really rich as this exchange of ideas between the staff at New York Historical, the staff at the New Netherland Research Center, and our group happened. Edward Van Dyke, our 3D modeler, actually did research at the Archives of the Netherlands on plans for bridges of this type across canals within the decades that this particular set of bridges was made. And so the 3D models were based on those. Here is the fort. And again, in the fort, you'll see that we consulted with Levada Nahan and others on the question of masonry. Certainly we know that enslaved Africans came over from Kingdom of Congo with extensive masonry skills. So in the year in which they were adding masonry to the side of the fort, we expected that that probably would have been done by enslaved Africans. Or at least for the moment, that is how we have the model. The great thing about the digital world is that if you make a mistake, you can change it. It's not hard, or it's hard, but you'll do it anyway, right? So I want to stop at Sarah Kierstead's house. This is a really interesting stop because we originally hadn't thought about doing it, but then later on, as we began researching in the documents, we found that Sarah, who we knew was a really unusual woman in that she was a translator and an orator. She helped negotiate several Indian treaties and developed a friendship with Chief Oratom. We found that right in front of her house, there's a giant pile of lumber, noted in the documents, and that the Indian traders were trading venison and corn and all kinds of other things there weekly, if not daily. By 1661, there's a resolution saying that they need to build a house for the Indian traders, and by 1662 it has been constructed. So that was a really interesting thing to find out. When we go to Sarah's entry, we find that in her will, she also was a person who owned slaves, and she willed enslaved Africans and enslaved indigenous people to her children. The wall is particularly interesting because we used drawings from the documents to build the 3D wall to the exact measurements that the documents drawings say. So we are in the process of course, making all of this a little bit better. You can see we've started adding weeds and all kinds of things along the path here, and it still has a long way to go. But it does follow the document's exact plan. And we'll get to the company garden now. I want to show you Joel Grossman's wonderful article, and we have a little picture of the page that has the chart of the seeds from the 17th century. Thanks to the Holland Society, you can see his article here anytime you wish to read it. In the company garden, we used not only the types of plants that Joel suggested, we had multiple interviews with him about the quartered gardens, not gardens, and we also worked with the New York Botanical Gardens, amazing collections to help populate this garden. You will see pumpkins and apples, pears, grapes, and perhaps the first of its kind, a Three Sisters planting in 3D, which are mounds where corn, beans, and squash are planted. The last one I'm going to show you here is Broadway. Okay, there it is. So in Broadway, you get to fly down this very, very broad area, and you can see the gardens here, and you can see how many gardens we have yet to model, so there's a great deal of work left to be done. The cattle market described in the documents is shown, and this is one of the things that really changed the landscape for the indigenous people. The fact that pigs and cows and sheep need vast areas of pasture really, really changed the landscape over the long run. There remains a great deal of work for us to do to improve the model. We hope to begin modeling interiors soon, and the 3D models relating to Long Island are also going to be in their first iteration, so improvements are going to follow to help us show indigenous culture. We've set up the mapping portion of the project so that we can go and use global maps. I will show you that very briefly. Virtually anything you're looking at, you can zoom to the world at this point and see the place that you're looking at in relation to the rest of the world. Eventually, we hope to add maps in lots of other places in the world. And the encyclopedia, we're hoping to add more participation, and we want to connect the models to the time slider so that you can see New Amsterdam develop. And here's our very fun, Edward's very fun first stab at that. You get to see a flyover of the original model and the city that grows up through and around it. This eventually will be something of a time slider that can show you the New Amsterdam houses as they were built. Pretty fun, right? I know, I thought that was very fun too. He called me one day, he's like, I played with this thing, what do you think? I was like, I really like that, Edward. He's a genius. All right, so in conclusion, we're going to take a last look at the misty, beautiful city this might have been at that time, or at least our imagining of what it was. And we want to say that everyone at the New Amsterdam History Center wishes to express deep gratitude to the Daughters of Holland Dames for the many years of financial, spiritual, scholarly, and personal support that you have provided to make this view of the 17th century possible. Thank you.
We might have time for one or two questions in the room. Anyone? Robert?
Go for it.
I couldn't help it, looking at the map yesterday, and I said, oh, well, this is terrific, but it's so clean, it couldn't have been clean like that before. So how much,
Yeah, you have
less
to.
clean would it be?
Yeah, you have to really. That's a really tough trade-off. How much time do you spend devoting your modeling time to doing things like adding weeds or adding garbage versus adding people and bridges and buildings? And we did talk about that. We were like, wow, this looks.
Well, like that woman who had the slave camp outside of her house.
Yeah. Yeah, the trading post outside of her house looks super clean, right? And how clean would it be? You've got a bleeding deer hanging there, right? It probably wouldn't have been all that clean. You're right. It's just the amount, we hope to add more realism in every iteration. That's an iterative problem, and we know it. We're very well aware of it. Especially you come down Broadway, and it looks like there's a street sweeper went through.
It wouldn't have necessarily been disgusting. I mean, I had spent 13 years in developing countries in very rural areas.
Sure.
And they aren't filthy like we think they're filthy, but it does have different things going on.
Sure, and the pigs were some kind of street sweeping crew, but they would have made their mess too, right? So, you know, I think probably in future iterations, it would make a lot of sense for us to rough it up a little bit. I agree with you.
One more question and before we bring this to a close.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for giving me the time. Oh, and thank you for the beautiful